Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. So, Marty, absolutely great to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Guy.
Well, I've been looking forward to this. I say that every single time I do an episode, so that just tells me the quality of the people that I'm getting on. I always get slightly schoolboyish and excited, which must be a good sign. But for those of you that don't know who Marty Strong is, please do an introduction.
Sure. So I'm a Chief Executive Officer and Strategy Officer for three companies. One's a holding company, and the other two are a healthcare company and a training company, about 750 to 800 employees all in. And I spend my day leading that and trying to think big thoughts.
And try thinking big thoughts. So that would indicate that you've created space for yourself. That might be interesting, as a lot of people struggle even with that concept of thinking big thoughts and not being pulled into the nitty gritty. You know, you've got an interesting history as well. You've got the roles that you fulfill, the history that's taken you to where you are, and you've got some novels and books that are out I want to discuss. Maybe the first stepping stone, Marty, just to bring a little bit of context to who you are, is just give us that sense of the journey that took you to where you are now, that just gives people a sense of where you're talking from, what your context has been, and where your experiences have come from. I think that really helps set the scene.
Sure. So I spent 20 years as a leader in the Navy SEAL teams, similar to the Special Boat Service in the UK. Actually, we have a very close relationship with the SBS, and actually an exchange program. There's usually a couple of SEALs sitting down there in Poole and a couple of SEALs sitting over here in Virginia Beach, and it's been going on since probably 1970. So that's where I think I got my basic understanding of leadership. And of course, a lot of it has to do with crisis and combat training and then actual combat. But it's a unique group of people. They're they're type A, but they're extremely intelligent and creative, and you have to influence them more than order them around, which is an interesting way to learn how to lead. And when I left the service after 20 years, I started managing money for United Bank of Switzerland. I was a portfolio manager, so I did that for almost 8 years. And you wouldn't think there's a lot of leading there, but the interesting thing is you spend most of your time with your clients trying to talk them off the ledge, hand-holding, explaining, laying out a future for them. So in essence, you end up leading your clients a lot. You end up giving them confidence through your expression of confidence, and of course that's always a component of good leadership. And then after I left that profession, I got into government contracting and eventually ended up at the position I'm in now. So I've been out of uniform for 27 years, leading businesses, and I was in uniform for 20.
I already realise that this should probably be a 3-day podcast, but we're going to have to do it now. So, just hearing you say each one of those has got its own, I'm sure with the right bottle of wine and the right food, it's a weekend of stories and you going, and here's another absolute cracker. But we'll try and pick around it. I think I'm going to jump forward then to, you have a forthcoming book called Be Visionary that's going to be available in January, and when it comes out I'll put the links in. But you also have some other works out there, so just give me a sense of what's already in the public space, and then we'll have a little bit of time around the Be Visionary, and we'll go into some other questions. But what have you already got out there, and then bring us into Be Visionary?
So around 2017 I decided to write a novel. It's one of my bucket list, something I wanted to do. And while I could have written a novel about the SEAL team experience, I decided to purposely dodge that easy subject matter. But I wanted to still kind of capture the ethos, the warrior ethos, the camaraderie, the closeness of that brotherhood. And so I ended up creating a time travel series of science fiction books. It's called the Time Warrior Sagas. And you'll love this. I mean, the first book opens up with a Saxon shield wall, in Britain, ancient Britain. So, but it's about time travel, and so I started writing those books. There's 4 in the series, and after about the second book, I was feeling pretty comfortable. I thought, well, maybe I can address the SEAL team theme, and what do I want to do with that, and how do I want to write that? Well, I did want to write it like a comic book, lots of Marvel heroics and all that. I wanted to do something that was a little bit deeper, so that if you read it, you kind of felt like you were hanging out with SEALs and saw how the banter went back and forth, the kind of thing that you remember when you're out of uniform and thinking back. So I started writing the SEAL series, which has 5 novels. The 5th one came out in June of this year. So that's 9 novels all in, and at the end of that, I decided I was going to write a book on leadership, which was called Be Nimble, How the Creative Navy SEAL Mindset Wins on the Battlefield and in Business. And that came out in January of this year. And that was an attempt by me. I was doing consulting and mentoring, not just for my own direct leadership reporting to me, but also for other people, other business owners, CEOs. And I thought, well, I've got all these great ideas and thoughts and inputs, and people seem to be gratified, and it's all useful. They say, tell me that. So I'm going to start writing this stuff down. I'm going to start writing my approach, my shtick on how I address leadership issues. And it's about the leader, him or herself, kind of what's going on between their ears, the psychology of that, the dynamics of leadership between a leader and other human beings, and then the organizational kind of planning, architect part of leadership. So that was that book. And there's one book that is on strategy, and I had a lot of feedback that I could probably focus on that as a whole separate book, because a lot of people like that chapter. So I decided to write Be Visionary, Strategic Leadership in the Age of Optimization, which is basically about the conflict between strategy and vision and optimization and micro measuring as a placeholder for strategy.
If I've heard that right, in terms of that focus, the reality then of having it written down, which is almost the easy part in some respects, and then the reality of actioning and not getting in the weeds and being able to step away.
It's that, but it's also, that's been going on, at least in the United States, for about the last 15 years. It's a hyper focus on immediate gratification. It started at the publicly traded company level. Shareholder value as a quarterly measurement, where companies kind of shrunk their vision, shrunk their horizons down to how are we doing now, how are we doing this week, how are we going to do next week, but that was about it. And I guess the commentary that was going on, and I've actually, I interact with bankers and other finance people and everything, and that's their focus. They just want to count what's happened, and they have a tendency to just flop the past. Past is prologue, because they don't know how to do the other thing, which is to actually sit there, as I said at the opening, to think the big thoughts and look out and see what's possibly coming at them, positive or negative, on the horizon. And I was experiencing this, seeing this. It was a real thing, and I'm like, okay, so the business schools are teaching this, and big companies are emulating this, and nobody asks you what you think is going to happen in 2 years. What's the industry going to look like? What's your market going to look like? What they're asking you is, did you hit your KPIs, your key performance indicators for this week? And what that does is that reinforces in leaders and aspiring leaders and leaders at different stages that are rising, that's the measure, that's the focus, and that's what you do as a leader. You focus on how many widgets did you make last week. So I think that's, no pun intended, it's short-sighted, but it's also devastating, because a lot of times the company will do that and they don't look up and see the train coming before it's too late.
I've said this quote a few times on this podcast, it's the only one I can remember, which is F. Scott Fitzgerald's quote, "The sign of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to have two opposing truths and still function." And that concept of being able to deal with, we've got to hit some numbers now, but also we've got to be viable in 2 years, 5 years, etc. And I've also particularly noticed it in private equity backed organizations where when the purchase goes through, we've got 3 years, that's fine. But then the second year, then we've only got a year left. And literally people lose their marbles around a set of targets and earnouts and bonuses or whatever that is. And I see that a lot where there seems to be a point in an organization cycle where the distance seems that we can do leadership development and we can do the big visions. But actually as the funnel, the timeline decreases, people's focus becomes more myopic. It's a catalyst for negative behaviours, which in essence is generally fear. The fear of not getting the money at the end or being seen to do what is being driven by certain people. So I guess that's what we're talking about, that timelines and focus and short-sightedness and being held to account for the now damages and prevents people holding a vision for the future. But then again, you can't say, listen, the reason we're doing rubbish now is, well, it'll be great in 5 years. It is that weird balance. And is that what we're talking about?
Yes, and I think there's a all too human desire to risk mitigate. So when you shorten those horizons, you're bringing everything into the more knowable time frame. You're reducing your risk of failure because it's just next week. How could anything change that dramatically in 1 week? But think about the risk taking of looking out at the horizon a year, 2 years. You don't know. It's an assessment. Maybe it's an analysis of some sort. It's a much broader approach to studying what could be, what might be, what's possible, and also you as a professional or your organization, what their role is going to be in that new possible. So that's a lot of risk. I mean, what I just said was it's all fuzzy, wuzzy, mushy. Let's get back to what's going to happen next week. That makes me feel comfortable. I don't have to worry about. But here's where another adverse effect of that short-sightedness. Why should I invest in anything or anybody if all I'm doing is measuring a week out? If you think about investing like training or investing in plant and equipment, it's because you want to be something bigger or do something better in the future. Investing in training and investing in plant and equipment it's a way of making you stronger. It doesn't happen immediately. It's a way of making you stronger at a point in time where you want to make a change. You want to affect the future. And if you don't have to worry about that, if you're not worried about the future, not worried about affecting any future, then why spend $5,000 or $10,000 to send Susie or Bob to some training course? Especially if they're going to go offline and nobody's doing their job while they're at the training course. So now you're back into the optimization short-term focus. There seems to be no justification for gapping that person's job and spending the money. So there's a couple of other insidious things that happen when you shorten that horizon.
It's very interesting as you're fighting against it's either maturity or it's confidence or it's even duty, the duty to, I don't want to go so far as to enrich other people, that might be too big a word, but to invest in people and to grow them and to add value to them. But why would I do that if they're going to go off in a couple of years? Well, actually, maybe that makes you more attractive to people coming in. So you've always got a funnel. There is no perfection. There is no have your cake and eat it. But actually, if you're very attractive because you're seen as that maybe you are a conduit, but you've always got high talent coming in, there's got to be that ability to hold these two truths, I guess.
Yes, but if you think about the culture that inspires through improvement, that thinks about the future and leads as if the future is something that we should all strive to achieve and achieve in the way we want to achieve, whether it's safety, whether it's seizing some great opportunity. Those are the kinds of cultures where people are going to stay longer. So I had somebody one time ask me, why do we want to spend money on training somebody? Because, as you just mentioned, they could just leave, in a year or two. And I said, what's the alternative? The alternative is we don't train anybody. They come in as smart or as capable as they were the day that they checked in and were onboarded by HR, and that's the end of that, because we don't want to make them any stronger for somebody else. But if that mindset also creates a culture that's different, it's like we don't think you're going to stick around. We don't believe in you enough to invest in you. You see how that kind of works. You are what you are, and you are what you practice. And so and everybody else is perceiving what you are. So better to invest in people and invest in the future and plan for the future than to not.
Yeah, it's a very simple thing. And there is something about creating an environment where you always know there's going to be loss, but actually what you'll have is a positive narrative around the culture. You'll have those that will leave and maybe come back because they'll go somewhere else and realize, oops, maybe I shouldn't have gone. Maybe it's about the scales and the balancing that says, look, there's always going to be an element of maybe we did lose on that investment, or maybe actually that didn't go as far as we'd have liked with that person. But actually, if we're doing it right, the counterbalance should be more people have developed. There's a greater sense of community. There's a greater sense of trust in us. So it's never all in our favor, but it should be weighted.
I think it's a better environment to work in and to lead. It doesn't have to be spending money, and it doesn't have to be, gapping somebody's time doing their job to farm them out to a school someplace or to an experience someplace. Mentoring and coaching can happen right on site. And again, if you create a culture where people are thinking that way and thinking about each other that way, then every leader, every strata of the organization is trying to make their direct reports stronger. It's an interesting thing in the military. You always try to train your replacement. That's the whole point. Because in combat, you may need a replacement. So you always train everybody to be able to do everybody's job. You cross-train, you train up. You have corporals that in a pinch could lead a mission if they had to. And you're always trying to make everybody stronger around you, because when it's time to go to war, you go with what you got and who you have. So if you haven't been working really hard to make the team stronger, everybody on that team, shame on you. So that's something that you don't see a lot in the commercial world. I don't want to train my replacement. That's a job security no-no. I don't want to train everybody in case I'm going to be I'm the smartest person in the room. Why would I want to train 4 other people to become the smartest person in the room? That's my edge. That's my ante up in this game. So I'm going to actually dilute my authority and power as a player in this organization if I start helping everybody else.
One of the bullet points I had is why optimization is the enemy of strategy in business, and how to navigate that, because optimization is a beautiful word. Almost what could you disagree with? Why optimization is the enemy of strategy? I kind of like some of your thoughts on that.
And so you probably have already picked up that I'm more of a visionary person than an optimization person. I think there's more than enough people out there that know how to optimize. And if you have systems that are measuring, it makes it even easier to optimize, because you can see with finite detail how you're doing compared to what you wanted to do and what that variance is, and you attack the variance. But there's not that many people out there that are trained in strategy or trained in being and exercising a visionary outlook. I mean, think about it. I mean, it's just like leadership. They don't teach leadership in college. And many, 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 many companies and corporations don't teach leadership. There's a few standout large corporations that have internal academies and things, but for the most part, they don't do it. It's just not like the military. They don't do it systemically, where you come in, okay, you're in charge of 4 people, and then 3 years later they're going to train you. Now you're in charge of 10 people. There's a constantly upwardly mobile commitment to leading greater and greater numbers of people, more scope of authority and responsibility. So you don't see that in the commercial world. And I think you're outnumbered then, because if you go into a room and there's 10 people, there might be 9 optimizers and 1 visionary person. And it's really hard, in my experience, to convince people that are specialists and love to optimize and make things just so, to just throw it all away. Let's spend 5 or 10 minutes just thinking about how crazy things are going to be in 36 months. It's not the way their brains work. It's why they're good at optimizing. It's why they're good at measuring, accountants and statisticians and analysts, and they're good at what they do. And so they tend to see what they do and what they like to do to be the be all end all. And they're not real happy about the strategist, visionary person, because think about this. optimizing is the opposite of disruption. Optimizing is trying to achieve maximum stability on some definition of what stability is. And vision and strategy is essentially disruption. It's screw that. Let's forget the products we're making. Let's make some new products, because in 36 months, the products we're making are probably not going to be attractive anymore. The market's moving this way. I've been doing all this study, and they just stare at you. You got to be kidding me, right? You know, we spend every day doing the best we can to make the products we have absolutely perfect. And you're saying, forget that. Let's just go with something else. Yeah, it's quite an emotional engagement when you really get down to it. If you just walked into a room and say, "Hey, this is what we're going to do. You know, this is our new strategy. We're pivoting to the right." You're going to get a lot of upset people. Not because they don't acknowledge your positional authority and I guess power to make that decision, but they think you're crazy because they've got everything just so. Why would you break that all up and mess it all up? But as you know, the world does that to you anyway, whether you want to pay attention to it or not. So,
is that baked into the militaries? And look, the plan doesn't survive first contact, and I'm possibly messing up that.
No, you're right.
Phraseology.
Yeah.
But there is something on that lines of, look, the mission might be to rescue Bob from that situation. But you know, when we said we'd land and go left, it looks now we've got to land and go right. When you're bedded into keeping the end in mind, but constantly flexing, do you think that's part of that way of thinking, that we don't lose sight of what the mission is, but the route there may constantly shift and change? And do you think that's part of what drives you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's all special operations, commandos, et cetera, train not just for adversity, but for a disruption to their plan, a disruption to the underlying assumptions of their plan. I was smiling there when you were talking about how many people you see there. There's supposed to be 5, then there's only 2. In my experience, it's the reverse of that. They tell you there's only going to be 2 bad guys, and there's like 30 bad guys. So even today, with all the technology and everything, there's still surprises. There's weather, there's malfunctions, mechanical malfunctions. There's things that screw up your timeline and cause you to have to change your plan. And so what they do in special operations, they teach leaders and they teach all the rest of the people to be highly flexible, nimble, and agile. You have a plan. It's the best plan you've been able to put together with the information you know, but you're extremely flexible as you're going towards that target outcome, that if something changes in the underlying assumptions, you can roll with it. You can adjust to it. And so I'm very comfortable with that concept. But the other thing is, if you study business, that's the same way it is in business. There's no such thing as a static universe. Everything's changing all the time. And the fact that you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. If you can't see your competitors figuring out a way to leapfrog you, if you can't see a technology that's about to pop out that's going to make your product moot, if you can't see that your customers are now bored with whatever you're doing and they're swinging to something else, that's because you're not looking and paying attention. It's not because it's not happening. Yeah, the longer the time span, the more likely it's about to happen. And there's no that's the other thing. There's no real rhyme or reason to change. There's I think that's why you need to stay on your tips of your toes. You need to train to stay on your tips of your toes. As a leader, you have to be that flexible, and as an organization, you have to prepare to be that flexible. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can do scenario-based training, contingency training, where you bring everybody in a room and say, okay, our number 3 plant in Sri Lanka just blew up. Now what? Or our main distributor just jacked us up for twice the fee, or that's it. He's not gonna move our stuff and go. What are you gonna do? I mean, you can game that stuff out all the time, but nobody does. It's like, when it happens, they just react.
Knowing the military to a point and emergency services, time is taken to train for new circumstances and new situations, and there's rotations and things like that. But in that corporate space, whereas there might not be the physical risk, the financial risk is just there every single day. And when I go to work with teams, it's, oh, can't we do one day? Why do we have to do two? Of course, when they're into it, they get it. And then they go, oh, thank God we did 2 days. And I can see the value. The relationship with taking time out is not there for most people. That what I would call the discipline or the relationship with craft, actually, you're not taking time out. This is part of the job, and actually seeing it as that.
Yeah, I tell my leaders they need to operate for 75% of their time, and for 25% they need to be thinking. And that's two totally different realms of brain focus. One is the to-do list, and the other one is thinking and looking and wondering what's happening and talking to people outside of your little group. Get away from the group think, even outside of your industry, to learn what other industries have gone through. Sometimes the other industry has gone through something, and there's some precursor events that you recognize are starting to happen in your industry. Like the gig economy. If you realize that full-time employees have suddenly shifted to just a handful of people in an apartment building, essentially, and everybody else is living in their house, and you're freelancing all the work out, and that happened over in this industry, and you realize you're having a hard time hiring people, and you're hearing the echo, the rumblings of that happening in your industry. You're like, oh, okay, now I get it. So sometimes it's weird. You can just look over there and say, well, that's what happened to them. Could it happen to us? And is it a bad thing or a good thing? Should we steer that way on purpose and faster, or are we going to try to resist it and stop it from happening, or is it a trend?
I'm fascinated by the question. If we were starting up now as a group of entrepreneurs and we were literally saying, right, in the next 6 months, we're going to get this off the ground and do it, how would we do it? And I'm always fascinated by the outcome being nothing like what they're doing currently. And yet there's no desire to retrofit or to recalibrate. Oh, we've gone too far. Or, well, yeah, but if a new person came in, a new organization came in, what would their actual cost base be today? How would that look to what we've got if, as you say, they just did it differently? And I'm always fascinated by denial. I've got a company I used to work with, and they do, the predominant part of their marketing is through post and phone calls. New business phone calls, but you can now opt out of receiving phone calls. You can opt out of receiving certain mail. They had somebody in who said, I predict that over the next 10 to 15 years, your sales marketing process will become virtually invalid. And they're still doing it now. This was at least 12 years ago. And I know they're not doing that well. What is it that you think stops people adapting?
Well, fear of failure is very strong. And failure is associated many times with risk-taking. And risk-taking is doing something different, embracing the unknown, chasing the unknown. So I think that's a big part of it. I'm actually working on a small startup right now, which all the work that I'm doing and all the advice I'm giving is essentially, it's almost like a virtual organization, in that it can operate and it can do everything without having a brick and mortar headquarters. And the people on the board that I'm talking to about this are all in their mid-50s, early 60s. They're all engineers. And they don't understand what I'm saying. They don't get it. They don't know why I'm not why am I not proposing hiring full-time employees with benefits. And because I've already been there, done that, I get it. I've seen. I have a hybrid organization with the 3 companies I run, and like a lot of people, the pandemic accelerated that, both with the availability of platforms that are cloud-based. So my accountants could do payroll from their house. A couple years before the pandemic, they didn't have the wireless bandwidth to move those files from their house. So they would have to come into work no matter what and use the T1 lines, whatever. So there's been a lot of things that have, technology-wise, that have been accelerated because of the pandemic. This whole medium we're in right now, this video teleconferencing. First, we had to get past the idea that if you don't meet somebody face-to-face, it's a waste of time. That was a habit, that was a tradition. And then it was the quality, the quality of the experience. Does everybody have a good camera? Does everybody have a good microphone? Does everybody have software that works? But then they fixed that because we all had to talk that way and meet that way and do business that way, 2020, 2021. And now it feels like it's been around forever, right? So that's how change usually happens. It usually happens a little bit here, a little bit there. You see kind of the precursors of it, hints of it, and then all of a sudden it hits a tipping point and wham, it's the new way of doing things. If the new way of doing things is going to be harmful to your company or throw it for a loop because you weren't prepared for it, it's probably a good idea to be looking for those hints and precursors all the time.
Obviously, people coming through who are younger now, their relationship with IT, social media, obviously is generally there. I'm 53, so I notice people who are sort of 45 and up can definitely have a very ambiguous relationship with technology. It's not so much that they're on social media, but they don't have it to look at it. And I think there's a difference between, so I may have things like TikTok on my phone. Am I on TikTok as a user? No, I might post a few videos on there just so it looks like I've got a profile. But the reality is I've got a 10-year-old son and an 8-year-old son, and I want to be abreast of it, but also I don't want to miss a trick if something goes wrong. And people seem to almost abdicate out of staying connected, I guess, to that, what's coming through. Maybe because it's too much effort or they see it as frivolous, but then they miss opportunity. And I think that's something I see. There's a website called Fiverr, Fiverr, and you go on there and there's all sorts of people, they'll do your graphic design or they'll do 3D modeling, and it starts at $5 and it goes up. And I was in an organization a couple of years ago and they were sending stuff off and they go, yeah, we'll get this back in about 2 or 3 weeks from our design agency. I said, I reckon I could get you that for tomorrow morning. And I said, well, I'm going to spend $20 because I paid an extra 10 to 15 to get it done quickly. And mine came back the next day because it went off to, wherever on a different time zone. And it blew their minds. It blew their minds that they were paying such an amount of money versus $20 to get somebody to get it back. And then they actually then started to shift over to that platform. Why does it take an outsider to offer that? And why is there not an internal mechanism for review? I guess that's what I'm hearing from you. Scan the landscape, pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, so you've got a couple of things, right? You got 3D printing, you've got the gig labor model, and you've got crowdsourcing. So just those three things could offer a huge boon to companies if they really thought about it. I mean, the gig economy thing is interesting in that. So I've done it a couple of times for editors and for artists and things. So you could have a top artist that you employ that costs you a lot of money, you got to pay benefits for, and you only give them a project once in a while, or for about 2% of that total cost, you can get one of the best fill-in-the-blank performers in the world, wherever they are in the world, and they can get it to you quicker. So you actually have the ability to tap into the entire pyramid of talent in whatever category it is, and you can go to the very top and get the very best in the world, or you can get the middle class, and you can do it by just tossing it up and seeing what everybody says. So I had my books, my seal books are all on Audible and Amazon. So Amazon's got this really cool program. They've got a big pool of narrators. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands, that have gone through their quality control process. They have to be able to produce, edit, pre and post production, all that, and they have to have the voice. And so when you go to get in their system, you have to fill out this application. And everything you can think about characteristics of voice, stern, man, woman, high voice, shrill voice. I mean, it's like all these things. You pick them all out, and then some other attitudes. If it's a novel, you got to put in like your top 3 characters and give a little bit about it. And then once you're ready, and then you have to put like a 4-page, any 4 pages from what it is your project is, your book, whatever. You upload that, and then you hit go. Within 3 hours, your phone's blowing up with auditions. They read that material you gave them, and you if you get on a regular computer, you'll see them all racked and stacked. You'll see the little play button. You hit the play button, you can listen to every one of them. I bring my wife in, friends. What do you think? I'm down to these 3 people. I mean, I'm crowdsourcing, and then I'm crowdsourcing again by getting other people's opinions about the voice. So, and that's just, to me, that's like a casual application because I've known about it for a couple of years. But if I say that to people now on the street or a friend of mine, they'll like stare at me like it's like, you got to be kidding me. That's incredible. Well, no, that's been around a long time, and you don't know about it because maybe you don't have a reason to, or maybe you're just not becoming I call it intellectual curiosity. You have to seek insights and asymmetrical information. You got to look outside of your normal world. Watch other TV shows. Watch something crazy like something on string theory, or how are tires made? Just all kinds of weird. You just got to do all this stuff. Talk to all kinds of individuals that are from different walks of life and backgrounds, and kind of like nail soup. It's weird. You'll hear all these insights, and you'll think, well, these don't really relate to exactly what I'm doing with my life or exactly what I'm doing with my business. But I'm telling you, somebody will say something, and you'll get this epiphany because it's something that you never would have applied, but now you see how brilliant it would be if you did apply it. And you wouldn't have known if you didn't expose yourself.
I really buy into that. So people like Jordan Peterson, for example, may very well be one of the smartest human beings on the planet. And it doesn't matter if you agree with him or don't disagree with him. But when you listen to him, you certainly learn how to formulate an argument. You definitely understand the benefits of having done some research. Generally, when people speak to Jordan Peterson, they brought a pencil to a knife fight. He's much more knowledgeable and he's much more fluent. And you go, yeah, it doesn't matter what he's almost talking about. That's how you do it. Know your stuff. Have practiced it, be verbally fluent, your shotgun's already loaded, and when you pull and shoot, it's almost like watching you're playing drafts and this guy's playing chess. That's how you do it.
And see, that's one of those weird situations where you have an old methodology applied now where nobody remembers it is actually highly effective. So Socratic logic. He's basically a master of Socratic logic, and unless you knew it, I mean, that used to be a part of learning, right? It used to be a part of every university because it allowed you to form a rational argument, and in a way that you almost got the other person, the adversarial viewpoint, into a logic trap they couldn't get out of. He's very, very good at that, and but that's an old thing that can be made new again because so few people actually think through what they're about to blab out. They don't form their thoughts that way. They don't construct their arguments that way. They argue, but they don't create a compelling argument.
Back to your 25% of the time thinking. It's not 25% of your time just reading books and looking out the window. It's 25% of your time thinking about working through your argument and have I got my fluency in the right place? And if I'm challenged in that way, does it stand up? Now, I can argue my point and my case, but actually, could I beat my own argument? And if I could, then I haven't really thought it through enough yet.
Jordan Peterson, so I'm 64, and I listen to that guy all the time. And I listen to him, and I listen to him, and I listened to his books on tape or on Audible. And one of the reasons I listen to him is I really enjoy listening how he puts his stream of thoughts, how he walks you into the conclusions. So I'm actually listening to him as much to be as a student of that Socratic logic, that methodology, as the content. Because I think that's a lost art, and I really like that. And I understand it. I read about it when I was a kid because my dad wanted me to read all the kind of classic philosophy and sociology and a lot of other things. And he's the one that told me about Socratic logic and some other forms of logic. And I didn't think anything of it at the time. But later on in life, it's like being a black belt in jiu-jitsu if you do it right.
I agree. And what I hear from you is, life is about what? Life is about curiosity. It's about the willingness to be vulnerable, because to learn, you've got to be vulnerable. And I think that is a Jordan Peterson point. Like when you go to university, you're supposed to be challenged. It's supposed to be physically safe, but it's not supposed to be intellectually safe, right? You're supposed to have moments where you go, oh, bugger, I thought it was this, and now apparently it might not be. And it might shake your foundations. That makes you resilient. It makes you anti-fragile. So I think there is something about, in the military, I can understand that there's a physical element to it that is not so much there in the commercial space. The reality is that mental toughness that ability to have thought through and have a logical space where you've challenged yourself more than any challenge that you can probably receive in open forum. And you're not holding a position of obstinacy, but you're holding a position of knowledge and depth and insight. Really what I'm hearing from you there, I think, which is that's the bit that will gain my respect. Even if we disagree with each other, you've clearly thought this through.
Yeah, at least in special operations, you're taught how to problem solve, and so that's part of your confidence too. So you have physical confidence, you have psychological resilience because you've been thrown up against a lot of difficult situations that reinforces that resilience, because usually you have to have that to get through the selection process in the beginning. But then they teach you, the one thing they do absolutely teach you is they teach you how to problem solve. So when things fall apart or get out of whack from what your plan was, nobody reacts in a negative way. Everybody, psychologically, intellectually, you kind of roll your sleeves up and go, okay, let's figure this out. And then you figure it out and go, okay, let's go with this plan. And it's a very comfortable thing because they put you through it so many times. It's just a part of the way you kind of roll. You don't even think about it really. So, and that's problem solving it's kind of like, it's like logic. If you practice problem solving, and if you aren't very good at problem solving, then find somebody who is, or find a course, whatever. How do you break problems down? How do you reassemble them? How do you weigh the different elements of the problem or the challenge? Is there one driving factor that you have to deal with, or are there two or three different driving factors? And if you deal with one, the other two still beat you. The weird kind of combinations of things where you have to prioritize and you still take the hit. You're not going to win. You're just going to lose less. And those are all judgment calls that are based on the ability to solve problems.
I think one of the biggest things I see in a corporate space is I talk about four things: trust, accountability, bravery, and connection. And when it comes to connection, I'm really talking about the willingness to contribute outside of your own need. And one of the things I see in that commercial space is very often there isn't unless it's done right and it's got right, you can really see the individuals who are in a team, inverted commas, but it's a team that is transactional. It's not necessarily about we're trying to solve this because we've all got to cross the line at the same time. There's often an element of, especially in larger organizations, even if I succeed and you fail, this organization will still survive. Therefore, I'll still be okay. I actually don't need you to succeed. Right, because I'd like you to, because that might contribute to a bigger bonus or something like that. But I'll still be here because the organisation will keep going. So as long as I look good, I will survive. And I think that's something I notice. How do you recognise or recruit to a standard or recalibrate people if they're going down that lightly, it's all about me pathway?
Luckily, there's very, very, very few. I mean, infinitesimal number of people that are both impactful, talented, and moving around the company thinking it's all about me. Or it usually it's one. If you have the one, you don't have the other. So, because I think that's a very shallow way to look at a victory. If you win and nobody else wins or nobody else was a part of it, that you survive because you're on the winners list, or you're on the somebody sees you as a winner. So I think it's got to be the organization that decides, and in the totality of all the people that are in an organization, a team. Say it's an advertising team of 10 people. There may be somebody who came up with the idea, great, but who produced the entire advertising campaign? The one person or all 10 people? So you have to look at that holistically. Would you give a bonus to the person that came up with the idea? Maybe. Do you give the whole team a bonus if the campaign ends up, kicking butt? Absolutely. So I don't know of very many jobs where all by yourself you can come up with the idea and produce the idea. So there's that production tail. Somebody else is putting in the work. And what I do is I'm a stickler for commitment and selflessness. When I see people working long hours and nobody asks them to, if I see people jumping in to help another project and nobody asks them to, just out of human kindness or a sense of professionalism that includes the team concept, I will give that person kudos or potentially reward them monetarily before the one idea person. Because that's how you build a real company. That's how you build a culture. That's how you retain people. Because if I'm struggling and having a hard time and somebody comes over and helps me out, excuse me, I'm going to remember that, and I'm going to feel like I'm part of something. So those people are what you call in the military force multipliers. You put one or two people with that outlook on life and professional performance, that it's not about me, it's about we kind of thing. That's something I can't do every day because no leader can run around and have that influence on every single employee. So if you find it, you supersize it. You try to figure out a way to retain those people for sure. So that to me is more important than the person that comes up with the one idea.
When you say a multiplier, have I understood that right? Because my understanding of that is somebody whose value multiplies, magnifies, X's those around them by the nature of their either care or interest or curiosity or discretionary effort or whatever it is.
Yes. So let's say there's 20 people in a department. There is no mentoring, there is no coaching, there is no training. Yet you find out at some point that one person, one woman in that group has been teaching, training, and mentoring the people all around her every single day and making that department stronger. Nobody's paying her to do it. She doesn't have a title associated with that as a role. She's just doing it. So in the military, a force multiplier would be like you take an SAS, say 2 SAS guys, and you drop them into a third world country and say, find a bunch of guys and train them to be a counter guerrilla force, and they do. That's a force multiplier. The results, the positive results are out of whack with the level of effort. It's just one person, but having this huge magnifying effect. And there are people like that. There's studies showing that social structures of organizations and big corporations, they map the actual social influence, like who's making things happen, who's the internal connector. And I read a book a few years back, and the thesis was, when you find these people, if they're making $60,000 a year, you should pay them $500,000 because they're keeping your entire organization together. They're the ones making sure everything is getting cleaned up and all the word's getting passed all over the place. It's like an ant farm as opposed to an org chart. That human beings figure out ways to work around and connect and everything. And there are people that are connectors and they're very good at it and they're invaluable. That's another force multiplier effect.
It's why very, very good EAs, they are a force multiplier. They're very good at going, now may not be the time. They're not doing the work themselves, but they're very good at offering counsel or insight or just saying, why don't you just wait a minute, go home, have a deep breath before you do anything. Or if you don't do something about this, I think it's not going to work in your favor. They're just very good at having very small inputs that actually guide and counsel and add value and reflection and stop people jumping off the ledge when they shouldn't and all these kind of things. The job on paper may look very two-dimensional, but actually it's a three-dimensional role. Marty, I'm super alert to time and I just want to keep on talking to you, but I'm going to be careful not to do that. Any books that you read that really stuck with you, or any podcasts that you pay attention to, or any websites that you go to?
Yeah, I read everything of Malcolm McDowell. I think he's got great insights, and he lays them out in a way that, for whatever reason, it sticks in my head. The 80-20 rule, trying to think of any others that really jumped out. I'm a big Joe Rogan podcast fan, but I tend to watch things that are, was it Graham Hancock or somebody? If he has somebody on that's an archaeologist or a scientist, or I think David Sinclair, who's an Australian guy that is at the Harvard Medical School doing research on aging, that is a very, it's enlightening and it's an entertaining, casual way, because he brings these extremely brilliant people in from all these different walks of life and from all these different industries, and you hear things you just wouldn't hear, and you hear them in an hour in a way that you'd never go read a book on the subject. So yeah, that's probably my go-to podcast.
Very much an avid listener of it, and I remember listening to it back in the day, as a martial arts fan when he became what he became. But I think this is an indicator of what listening to other people can do, because I've heard Joe get smarter. It started off at one level, but now he's holding very intelligent conversations, asking incredibly smart, I mean, he's sometimes messing about, but he's also asking incredibly insightful conversations, and he's learning from it. So he started off knowing as much as the next person, but over the years of talking to these people, guess what? He's got smarter, his brain's expanded, and is he now a better podcaster? But there's something about him, his gravitas, his weight, his impact. He's seen now as somebody that isn't just a bloke doing a podcast. And maybe that's what part of the leadership development is. It's not that you're going to get smarter intellectually, but your weight and the impact that you have and the resonance that you have will increase, because you're obviously more than just the role. And I guess that's really important. So I think that's what I'm hearing in you.
Sure. I think it's odd, rare, and wonderful that he is not succumbing to the popular, I guess, TV, media, entertainment paradigm where he's only going to have celebrities on. He's only going to have people that have a 10 rating, in average society. To bring in somebody to talk about string theory or to talk about NADs and human genomes and stuff like that. I mean, come on, that is not going to be a high level of entertainment value for the average person. But he does, and because he does, I've learned a heck of a lot about a lot of subjects I would have never listened to.
And it's also now, it's so large that's the interesting thing, isn't it? You've got a podcast that can last up to 3 hours, and you realize that people want the long form. Very interesting to hear him go, hold on a minute, my brain's trying to catch up with what you've just said, because he's not an expert. But I think that's okay, isn't it, to go tap out for a minute. I've gone now as far as I can go. And I think it's good to recognize that you're stretching your brain just like you would a physical muscle.
And you kind of hit the nail on the head, though. He's matured to the point where he reminds me now, his technique of asking questions is a lot more like the 40s and the 50s interviews. I remember, seeing clips on, the David Cavitts and people that asked really, really good questions and then sat back and listened and then asked really good questions again. Because I think if you ask good questions, it's like you're unlocking, the treasure trove. If you don't ask the good question, you don't unlock that. It can't be a shallow question. It can't be an obvious question. Sometimes he just asks some oblique questions, and then he shuts up and he lets them just unload, and that's how old commentators and interviewers used to, because the people wanted to hear the person they were interviewing.
And I think one of the things I notice as well, Marty, he takes time with them before the podcast, and he openly talks. You can hear that they've had an hour or two beforehand, and he's relaxed. They haven't just rocked in, sat down. In fact, you can always tell if you get somebody super famous and they've the Zuckerberg one was interesting because it was a little bit superficial. It wasn't one of the better ones because he wasn't probably spending 2 or 3 hours with Joe beforehand and easing into it. And that's maybe what leadership is as well, isn't it? Listen, I'm going to ask you challenging questions. I don't need to have to pull hen's teeth. I've got to engage with you in a way that if I ask you a question and you trust where it's coming from, I'm going to get an answer. And that's kind of what he's doing. He lays the groundwork and he gets them to buy into him. And then he can ask those questions, which is different to, I only see you once a year for a performance review. Here's the big question, wallop. And the person goes, right. Dude, there's no way I'm answering that because I don't know you, trust you. I think I see a lot of that in the way that he approaches it, for sure. So listen, Marty, I'm going to bring us to an end. I don't want to. People wanted to reach out for your connect. Is there a go-to place just to say hi or just to check out who you are and the work that you've done?
Yes, it's MartyStrongBeNimble.com. That MartyStrongBeNimble.com has links to all my books, including my novels. It has articles. It has a lot of other things on there, but that's the place. And I'm on Amazon too.
Okay, MartyStrongBeNimble.com. Fabulous. I'm going to get you to stay on for a few moments to make sure this uploads. From me and just those that are listening, this has been a genuine joy. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
That's it, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.